All right, so this set of flip notes is going to cover the end of World War I. So the results of the war itself, as well as the Treaty of Versailles, which was put in place at the conclusion of the war. So as always, make sure that you are filling in your paper notes, answering questions as they come up in Edpuzzle, and if you have any questions, let me know. So the first thing is the major socioeconomic losses that the world suffers in World War I. So we talk about the amount of people that are killed within World War I, and it's approximately 18 million people, which is a lot of casualties. I mean, you're talking massive populations here, entire generation of men who are dead. And even when some of them come back and they are permanently blinded or they're missing limbs and that sort of thing. I mean, it's a serious detriment to just the global society as a whole. And particularly in Europe, then you also have factories that have been bombed out, farms that have been destroyed by being in the middle of no man's land, entire cities that were bombed and raided, and everything has to be rebuilt. They basically have to start all over from scratch. This chart gives you a really good idea of the people who suffer the most. This is obviously just the Allies. I don't have a similar chart for the Central Powers, but you can tell that we as Americans lost over 100,000 soldiers, but remember, we only fought in the war for a year. We enter in 1917, the war's over in 1918, whereas the British, the French, and the Russians, they all started it. The Russians obviously get out of the war near the end, but at the same time, they're fighting a much longer time period, and, if you count these up, there's massive amounts of people that are killed as a result of this war. We also have this map, and this map is going to be important, so I'm going to bring it back in just a second. But you can see that there's a loss of land and the end of empires. So the Russians lose land, the Ottomans lose land, the Germans, the Austro-Hungarians, those empires no longer exist. So on the right side of the screen, you have post-World War I, and on the left side of the screen, you have pre-World War I. So you can see Germany took up from France all the way to Russia, and they take Poland out, they take Prussia out of that, and the Austro-Hungarian Empire was Czechoslovakia, and now it's Austria and it's Hungary, and also the region of Yugoslavia, which encompasses what used to be Albania and Serbia. It's all chunked sort of massively together. Here you have also the Ottoman Empire that's going to be changed. It's not seen on that map. But the entire map, the global sphere, is completely changed. The other big key is that you have colonies that are pushing for independence. So any of the colonies, particularly in Africa, that were fighting alongside the mother countries are all going to say, we fought this war and we should have rights, and we fought for people's freedoms, but yet we don't have our own. And so there's going to be, in Africa, a big push for countries to become independent. Those really aren't going to come into fruition until after World War II, but it's the beginnings of independence movements throughout Africa. So the treaty that's put together at the end of World War II, or World War I rather, is called the Treaty of Versailles. So Versailles, for the same palace that is built by Louis XIV and used as a centralization of power in the absolutist period of France, is where this treaty is signed. And your notes say the Treaty of Versailles made Germany gargle, Gargle. But there's several things that are going to be encompassed here. So I'm actually going to take this and make it a little bigger just so you guys can read it a little better on your screen. I'll bring it forward. There we go. The first is the war guilt clause, where Germany had to sign over the expectation that they caused the war themselves, that they were responsible for all the devastation, all the atrocities of World War I, which is basically false, because it was caused by a Serbian killing an Austro-Hungarian. It wasn't caused by anybody in Germany. But Germany has the most military might. Germany has the most sort of political power and wealth at the time period, the most industrial hub, and they did the most damage in France and Great Britain. And that's really the key, is that France and Great Britain are leading sort of the deliberations of this treaty. Woodrow Wilson is putting together 14 points, the 14 points plan, where he also tries to sort of limit some of this, but because he basically gets outvoted by the Germans and the French, they blame everything on Germany. German military is restricted. German army is restricted, so they're not allowed to have submarines. They're not allowed to have airplanes. They were granted 6 battleships and a standing military of 100,000 soldiers. If you remember back on the last slide, that's fewer soldiers than America had perish in World War I. This is a very extreme limitation of German military power. Again, in the hope that Germany can't rebuild and can't become this big, strong, powerful country anymore. Of course, you know from World War II that doesn't actually work. But for a while, that's the key, is to keep Germany from being too strong. They also have the R for reparations. So reparations are war debt payments. The Germans paid $33 billion to the Allies. Actually, that's what this picture is about. Is ultimately how much they pay. I know the picture says $55 billion, but ultimately they pay $33. But they actually don't finish paying them until 2010. Is when they made their last payment. Of course, the Nazis weren't making payments to the French or the British during Nazi power, and there's a little bit of stress there when they're split during the Cold War. But ultimately, they actually have to pay back debts to the Allies over the course of literally the entire 20th century and into the 21st. Germany also loses a lot of land. So Alsace-Lorraine, which was this sector of France, it was a French territory the Germans take during the Franco-Prussian War. It's a border between Germany and France. Is returned to France. They take the eastern section of Germany and they create the country of Poland. Poland is a Slavic country that is invaded during World War II. It's where a lot of the concentration camps are going to be in World War II. And they also take all of Germany's colonies. Germany and the Ottoman Empire and the Austro-Hungarian Empire all lose their colonies, and they turn them into mandates. So the mandate system is basically colonies that were given to France and Great Britain. So Great Britain receives Iraq, Transjordan, and Palestine, and the French receive Syria and Lebanon. And the goal was that the British and the French would temporarily administer their governments, so temporarily run their countries, help create working democracies within those countries, and then grant them their independence. They just don't. They maintain control over them through World War II, and at the end of the World War II, they basically were like, we don't really have time to do this anymore, so you guys can be free, which actually leads to a lot of the problems that are happening in the Middle East even today. Another thing it does is it creates the League of Nations. So the League of Nations is an international organization that is designed to keep peace and prevent future war. Woodrow Wilson proposed it in something called the 14 Points Plan. He came up with a list of 14 things that he wanted accomplished in order to create a lasting peace, and the League of Nations is one of them. The problem with that is that in the United States, the president can create those agreements, but the Senate has to ratify treaties according to the United States Constitution. And the United States government did not want to join an international organization that could potentially commit our funds and our troops to international conflicts. So we said, no, thank you, international community. We don't want to be a part of your league, and so we don't join, which severely cripples the League of Nations because it doesn't have any United States backing, it doesn't have any United States support. It also doesn't have any power. It has absolutely no power to enforce any of its decisions. So all they can basically say to people like Adolf Hitler is like, hey, can you not invade that other country? That'd be great. So it's actually ultimately a massive failure. And then the E is the extras. So you've got that Austria and Germany can never become unified. which is key because we're trying to keep the Central Powers from becoming again another massive country. I mean, we took land away from both of the Austro-Hungarians and the German empires, tried to limit them, limit their militaries, made them pay reparations, right? It's all an attempt to keep them suppressed. But for those who know much about World War II, one of Hitler's first aggressive policies in Europe is that he annexes Austria and it becomes a part of Germany as a direct violation of the Treaty of Versailles. So, as you can see, it's really just not super effective. If I reset this whole page, I can make this bigger too. So you can see that the Germans, right, are having to swallow the peace terms of the British, the French, the Americans, the Italians, and the Japanese. And basically they're just saying just like, you're going to have to do it, or we won't run your country anymore. So that's it. And like I said, if you have any questions, let me know.